Our planet may be under threat. One day, a natural or man-made disaster could make life on Earth impossible. If we can't live here, where will we go? Meet Dr. Basil Singer, physicist and robot builder. He's on a mission to find a new home for the human race.
Imagine doing this with a spacesuit on.
He'll use the best science on Earth to work out where in space we could live and what dangers and adventures lie ahead for the space pioneers.
Seconds. Guidance is internal. Ignition.
A rocket bound for Mars. Clear for liftoff.
3, 2, engine ignition, and liftoff.
The astronauts are pushed into their seats with 3 G's of force. Vibration like an earthquake.
Program response is good.
5 years of training have led to this moment. Their journey has begun.
My mission is to plan the human colonization of Mars. Getting people there isn't a problem. The technology already exists. But setting up a permanent home, that will be the real challenge. I've been talking to specialists who have the technology to live on Mars, scientists who've sent robots there, and visionaries who believe that settling on Mars is long overdue. This is not just a plan to visit Mars.
It's a plan to build a new Earth.
Of all the planets out there, Mars is the one that's most like home.
We're putting out an ad. Martians wanted. Salt-loving, cold-loving, not much pay, but an entire planet all to yourself.
We could be on Mars by the end of Barack Obama's second term. Okay, that's up to him.
This is my data command center, where I'm pulling together everything I need to plan the mission.
Mars is about 40 million miles away from the Earth, which makes it our second closest neighbor after Venus, and it'll take the space pioneers around 6 months to get there. I wanted to find out what's in store for them when they arrive, and Steve Squires was the man to ask.
He runs the Mars exploration rovers, and he probably knows Mars better than anyone alive.
If I had to choose a planet other than Earth to live on, I would choose Mars. It's got a climate that's more like that of Earth than any other planet. It's got gravity that is more Earth-like than other worlds that you might imagine going to. There's a canyon system that would stretch from New York to Los Angeles. There are volcanoes, as tall as Mount Everest 3 times over.
Steve's mission used the now famous rovers Spirit and Opportunity, which roamed on opposite sides of Mars. The data they collected means that I can prepare the pioneers for what terrain they'll face, how they'll have to dress, and how they'll breathe.
Mars does have an atmosphere. It's made of carbon dioxide. There's no oxygen to breathe. And it's a very thin atmosphere.
So there's no oxygen on Mars, but what it does have is an abundance of the most important pioneer resource of them all. This stunning photograph shows a frozen lake of water 6 miles wide.
There are massive deposits of ice beneath the ground on Mars. My suspicion is that if you go deep enough, you will find liquid. Because like any planet, as you go deeper and deeper, if you've got an internal source of heat, as Mars surely does, it gets warmer the deeper you go.
Like the rovers, the pioneers will face a climate of extremes, up to 95 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, plummeting to minus 110 at night. Steve's rovers have also witnessed Mars changing with the seasons.
In the wintertime, it's cold, of course. And the skies are pretty clear, at least in the southern hemisphere. It's kind of a nice time of year, actually. You can see little beautiful cirrus clouds drifting overhead. In the summertime, that's when it's warm. That's the dusty season.
Martian tornadoes, known as dust devils, race over the surface at 70 miles per hour. The biggest recorded have been a mile wide and several miles high.
Some of the storms can get very, very severe. And you can be on the surface looking up and you can't even tell where the sun is in the sky.
This image, captured by the Viking probe in the 1970s, shows an enormous dust storm sweeping across a quarter of the planet. And these Hubble images, taken 3 months apart, show surface details disappearing as the whole of Mars is enveloped in a blanket of dust. Finding ways to cope with the cold, the storms, the lack of oxygen, they're all crucial to the success of my mission plan.
But first, the space pioneers have got to get to Mars.
I've chosen a ready-made solution, an Ares heavy lift rocket similar to the one planned for the next moon mission in 2020.
But unlike the moon, Mars has got an atmosphere, which is both good and bad news for the crew.
The atmosphere will slow them from thousands of miles an hour to hundreds. That is the good news. The bad news is the heat that this process will create. The pioneers are going to need some serious thermal protection. I'm here at NASA Ames in California to check out the very latest in heat shield technology and find out what the pioneers are in for, because here they can recreate the extremes of a Mars atmospheric entry.
This is an arc heater, and the point of an arc jet is to simulate re-entry conditions for any vehicle that NASA flies. Basically, anything NASA's brought through an atmosphere, no matter where the atmosphere is, has passed through an arc jet complex somewhere along the way.
Today, the machine has been set to create the energy extremes my crew will face entering the atmosphere of Mars. The air temperature is an incredible 9,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and the flow is over 10,000 miles per hour. To be selected for the mission, the heat shield material needs to withstand 30 seconds of this assault.
You're trying to protect the payload, whether that's crew or scientific instrumentation, from the heating that it experiences up here. So the point of the heat shield material is to buffer that amount of heating. To give you some perspective, these facilities operate at energy levels about 1 million times greater than a hurricane force wind.
That's incredibly hard to imagine.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And this is the stuff I've come to test, Pica, the very latest in heat shield technology. Chemicals impregnated into the surface are designed to burn off, creating a layer of gas that actually deflects the heat. Surviving this test will make it just what I need for Mars.
That's absolutely amazing. It was really beautiful, all the colours coming off, and the air coming out of that jet is going at something like 4.5 miles per second, and you can see how as it sublimes and goes from solid straight into gas, it's creating kind of a protective gas barrier, this kind of thermal insulating layer, and losing all that heat around the edges. And again, it looks so cool.
Pica is easily good enough for the intense 30-second heat of atmospheric entry. But getting from space to ground happens in 3 distinct phases, and entry is only the first. The second is descent. The lander has to slow from supersonic speed to walking pace. Robotic missions use a parachute, but will that be enough for my much heavier manned mission?
Typically today, we'll hang the capsule beneath a parachute, and the parachute is then used to slow us down. When we get to a much larger vehicle, it turns out we hit the limit on how big of a parachute we can make. So we're going to have to change the way we do the descent phase. It's likely that what we'll do is we'll have this inflatable skirt that deploys around the outside of the capsule that's inflatable. And this thing is popped out just so it has enough drag to slow down from supersonic speeds to something that you would use just before touchdown.
200 feet from the surface, the third phase begins. The lander is prepared for impact, and the final drop is negotiated. Recent robotic missions to Mars have used inflatable balls to break their fall, but I don't think my astronauts would thank me for that.
If you put people inside of a vehicle like that that's bouncing around, they would be very uncomfortable. In fact, bouncing them around like that would probably kill them. So we'll have to have landing legs underneath it, and it will have to have rocket engines underneath it as well to slow yourself down from the speed of a car and find a spot that's smooth enough that the landing legs can touch down.
Rockets fire. The inflatable skirt rips free. Control is handed to the pilot. But there's a problem. Engine misfire. Crew, brace for impact. Not the smooth landing they wanted, but the crew is safe. Hidden from view, the impact has left its mark.
My mission is to plan a permanent home for mankind on Mars. Supplies brought from Earth will eventually run out, so future settlers will have to acquire everything they need, including water, fuel and oxygen, from materials they find around them. To find out how, I turned to Dr. Robert Zubrin, the godfather of Mars survival.
Mars has got water. And water, if you have it, you can split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and thus make rocket fuel and oxygen. Then in addition to this, it has iron, aluminum, sulfur, phosphorus, all the elements needed for industry. So there's a lot of places in the solar system that we might be able to visit, but Mars is a place that we can settle.
Robert runs the Mars Society, a group set up to promote manned missions to Mars. Part of this involves running virtual Mars habitats he calls tuna cans. I visited one to learn how to give the pioneers a self-sufficient life.
It's amazing. It's about as Mars-like as it gets on Earth.
Artemis Westenberg is my guide for the day.
Welcome to Mars. The big idea is that we try to simulate living on Mars, so in relative isolation. And we built something that might look like a lander from Mars. And actually the diameter of this thing was designed to fit on the cone of the rocket.
Next to the simulated lander is a greenhouse for growing food and recycling water. These tuna cans are designed to provide living and working space for 6 astronauts. On the ground floor, there's a lab with enough equipment to last for a 2-year mission.
If you forget something, you can't just pop down to Walmart.
No, you can't.
And upstairs, there's the kitchen, living space and communication centre.
Quite small, basic.
Very basic,
yeah.
Yes.
You got bedrooms.
Yes.
Even the tiny bedrooms make the most of space using segmented bunk beds.
Chris is on top of me. This is my cabin.
You're there.
Researchers come here for weeks at a time. They live under strict Mars conditions and carry out the kinds of experiments that would be done on a real mission.
The people who come and do experiments here and wear the spacesuits for 2 weeks start to believe they're actually on Mars.
Strangely enough, they do. And the people that come here are usually highly educated, very intelligent, so you would think that their brain knows very well they're not really on Mars. But very soon you start to believe it.
The Tuna Can project is all about the logistics of day-to-day life on Mars, but the really amazing stuff is behind the scenes. In this workshop, human life support systems for Mars are being developed. and they run on nothing more than dirt and air.
We've done a lot of R&D for NASA. This here, this one, is a complete working type of a machine for making liquid methane and oxygen on Mars, a complete rocket propellant combination. These here are different experiments that all have to do with breaking down soil to release the oxygen. This is a prototype of a scouting airplane. It sucks in the Martian air, which is carbon dioxide, liquefies it through compression, gets turned into high temperature gas, shoots out the rocket nozzle to make thrust. But the beauty of it is each time it lands, it can do it again. Okay? And we have flown that around.
To set up a permanent manned base on Mars, Robert has come up with a plan called Mars Direct. It's based around a 2-year cycle dictated by the orbits of the Earth and Mars. They orbit the Sun at different speeds, so the two planets are only at their closest once every 26 months. This window of opportunity only lasts for a few weeks, and so any economical plan to send people to Mars has to be built around this cycle. What's clever about Mars Direct is that it uses the Martian atmosphere to fuel return trips. The plan kicks off by sending an unmanned return craft, which makes its own propellant.
It runs a pump and it sucks in the Martian air, which is mostly carbon dioxide, and it reacts that carbon dioxide with a small amount of hydrogen that it brought from Earth to produce a very large supply of methane, oxygen, rocket propellant.
2 years later, a manned tuna can habitat, or HAB, arrives, followed by a second return vehicle.
The crew uses the HAB as their house while they're on Mars, as their laboratory, as their workshop while they explore on Mars for 1.5 years until the planets line up for a return flight. Then they get in the Earth return vehicle, they start it up, take off, fly back to Earth.
On the way, they pass a new crew flying out to Mars. They double the living space by joining their lander to the now empty original HAB.
Each time we do this, we add another habitat to the base. And after a little while, we've created the beginning of the first human settlement on a new world. There is nothing in this that is fundamentally beyond our technology.
I wanted to find out what it'll be like for our pioneers to experience life outside the HAB.
Can I put this one on?
You can.
So I'm going out with Artemis to collect a dirt sample.
Okay, yeah.
I can't imagine having to do this every day.
And so you clasp it?
These suits have been worn by hundreds of visiting scientists, and many have left their legacy in customization.
I've got a little tool on my little finger. I've got an itchy nose.
No, it's not to pick your nose. Let's go.
We're on Mars.
Yeah!
Of course, I'm not going to die if I take my helmet off here, and these suits are far from the real thing. But simply going through these procedures could reveal the little details that make or break a mission to Mars, including something as trivial as how to open a plastic bag.
Normally I'd use my teeth.
Yeah, I know! Go have your pinky.
Oh yeah.
Use it.
I'm definitely getting a feel for why this kind of experimentation is absolutely necessary. Silly little things like the tool on my small finger to get into this bag.
Yes.
You'd never have come up with such a solution, or you'd never have realised the problem, actually, sitting behind a desk.
It happens a lot on Mars.
I wasn't sure about this place when I arrived, but I think I get it now. A manned mission has to be perfect, right down to the smallest detail. And this is the place to get it right.
One year later, the pioneers are self-sufficient. But the greenhouses are showing their age. Pressure leak. A pioneer falls to the ground. Air is sucked from his lungs. Body fluids boil. He is minutes from death. Mars has claimed its first victim. Their friend's painful death is on the minds of each pioneer. Mars has become their home, but not yet a second Earth.
The atmosphere on Mars is 1/100th the pressure we have on Earth, and that is bad news for humans. Low pressure affects our blood. You can see what happens if you put blood inside a vacuum chamber. As the air pressure drops, the oxygen that keeps us alive simply bubbles out.
The answer is to surround astronauts with an artificial atmosphere.
And that is exactly what a pressure suit does. This is NASA's latest design for spacewalks. I wanted to know if it would be any good for Mars.
I've got astronaut long johns underneath here. I've got an astronaut long-sleeved t-shirt, and on top of it is this suit, and woven into it is this kind of rubbery tube system to warm me up or to keep me cool. And this is exactly the kind of thing that astronauts wear when they go out on space missions.
Now take your feet and wiggle them down in there.
If you thought the underwear was impressive, check this out.
The object is to get those feet all the way down the lower torso there into the boots.
Yeah. It's the pressure suit.
And just wiggle up.
This is not easy.
It's an airtight structure designed to be filled with compressed air, creating a mini atmosphere all of my own that's easy to breathe.
This is not like just getting up in the morning and putting on your clothes.
Okay, this is your communications carrier right here. You can use some water and air now.
Oh,
that
that
nice?
feels lovely.
Isn't that great?
That's a good bit of rotation I've got there.
Okay, now we're going to take you up to 1 psi.
Okay.
And we're going to do some leak checks to make sure the suit's sealed up all right. Okay?
These suits work at just 1/3 Earth air pressure, roughly the same as the cabin in an airliner.
Ears popped, you okay?
Yep, great.
This provides enough oxygen to keep astronauts alive, but it does affect their stamina when they have a lot of work to do.
It's quite heavy.
Okay.
Got quite restricted leg movement.
The reason they don't pump them up more is mobility. The greater the pressure inside the suit, the harder it is to bend the joints. Amazingly, in a pressure suit, astronauts expend around 75% of their energy just moving their arms and legs.
Mars pioneers will need much more freedom to explore their environment.
So I don't think a pressure suit designed for spacewalks is the answer. Prototype suits for the 2020 moon mission have many more joints. Something similar may be good enough for Mars. But the more joints you have, the more another of Mars's great problems comes into play.
When the first astronauts come back from Mars, I predict with confidence, when people ask them, well, what was it like? One of the first things they're going to talk about is the dust. The dust is horrible.
This is quite a surprise, but Steve Squires figures that keeping Pioneers dust-free could be the most important challenge I face. Martian dust is very similar to dust on the moon, and getting covered in it was one of the Apollo astronauts' biggest problems. Dust is something that NASA takes very seriously, so I went to see an expert who's been working on solutions for future missions, Ginny Furl.
If we were going to use this for prolonged periods or in an area that wasn't well ventilated, we would actually need respirators.
Ginny works with powdered volcanic rock, as it's the closest thing to space dust we have on Earth. And she's letting me borrow her tumbler to test out some materials today. A pillow of the fabric used to cover pressure suits, some plastics used for optics, and a couple of items I've brought from home.
I bought top-of-the-range watch.
Very nice.
And a top-of-the-range pair of sunglasses.
Like the dust on the moon, Martian dust has been formed over millions of years by meteorite impacts. These heat and pulverize rock to form a powder that's sharp and glassy. The result is a dust as fine as cigarette smoke. It's electrically charged, so it gets everywhere and it clings too.
If I wipe it, you just get streaks of dust back where you've wiped. No way.
Are the hinges jammed full?
Really graunchy. This stuff's just going to wreck any moving parts.
Mechanisms, gears, bearings.
And those lenses aren't half as transparent as they were 5 minutes ago. There's loads of dust inside. Just becomes completely dust infested.
It's the Velcro fastening that's no match for the dust. I need something a lot better for my Mars suits, and I'm hoping my diver's watch holds the key.
Not bad.
It seems that a waterproof seal is the only thing here that can resist a 5-minute exposure.
You know, living in the desert is hard enough, coping with rather large sand particles. If we were to colonize Mars, having to cope with that day in and day out would be a real pain.
It's a very serious problem.
Coming up with ways of dealing with the dust so that it doesn't disable mechanisms, so that it doesn't affect the health of humans who are there. I think it's going to be one of the biggest challenges that people face. It's just nasty stuff.
The challenge of dust has led to the development of vehicles like this, NASA's latest prototype rover. Just like my waterproof watch, the idea is to seal everything in, and that includes the astronauts. It's designed for the moon, but I wanted to find out if it's tough enough for Mars. Astronaut Mike Gernhardt helped design it, and he's expecting to drive it on the moon.
Hey. Hiya. This is so neat. So what are the improvements on this in the last 30 years since the last rover was on the moon?
So on the Apollo program, we had an unpressurized rover, so the astronauts had to stay in spacesuits the whole time they were riding the rover.
Sitting on top of the
They were sitting on top of the vehicle. Yeah. And this, although it's not much longer or wider than the Apollo rover, it has this pressurized cabin that we live in.
Yeah.
The other key thing is that we work with a system of 2 of these. So there's 2 astronauts in each one, and if we get out 1,000 kilometers and one breaks down, all 4 can get in the other and come back.
Oh, brilliant.
One of the really unique features of this rover is that the spacesuits hang off the back, okay? And we actually open the hatch that you see there, and then we open the back of the suit, and we literally step into the suits.
Oh, so the suits never go inside?
The suits never go inside, and so all the dust that's on the suit stays outside.
Yeah. So you're testing this on Earth, then eventually you test one on the moon.
Exactly.
Is the moon a really kind of good test bed for further exploration, for example, to Mars?
It really is. In fact, with this lunar program, we're going to be doing at least 6 months on the planet and evaluating and using these kinds of operational concepts. And if this works as good as we think it's going to, then we would actually use these on Mars.
This rover is designed to house 2 astronauts for up to 30 days. It has a top speed of 10 miles per hour and a range of over 600 miles.
These are our private sleep stations, and they're actually soundproof. People always want to know where the toilet is, and there it is in the back. We actually have a shower hose which is buried there, but you can take a spray shower. We've got hot and cold water for rehydratable food.
Yeah.
So you ready to go for a drive?
Yes, please.
Okay. This thing is amazing. It can go places that Humvees and trucks can't even dream of going.
But all the wheels move independently?
They can.
Oh, so the stick twists?
The stick twists, it turns. It's pretty easy to drive. You know, the stick commands, if I put forward, I go forward. If I yaw, I can turn. The other thing that's neat is I can go completely sideways.
Yeah.
All the wheels have to change position.
Right.
And now they're all going sideways.
Wow.
So we can go purely sideways, or I can put yaw into that.
The coolest innovation on this rover is the bulging observation window at the front. The pioneers will be able to check stuff out up close without having to put on a suit, and that has got to be good news.
You can see all the little fossils in there and shells.
I can see all the little shells in there. So you must be dying to try this thing out on the moon.
Yeah, I really am. In fact, my lifelong dream has been to go to the moon, and I can just picture seeing the Earth in the background, you know, looking over a big crater on the moon.
No matter how good the technology, Mars remains a dangerous place. 300 miles from base, as the rover scales an incline, a massive dust storm rises up. Lightning strikes a wheel. The rover tumbles to the plain below. A rover lies paralyzed, but help is close at hand. Quickly repaired, the rover is hauled up the slope. and back to work.
I'm building a mission plan for the human colonization of Mars.
So far, I've worked out how to get there, where to live, and how to overcome problems like low pressure and dust.
But there's another, even more dangerous threat that I need to have a look at. Now, on Earth, we barely notice it, but on Mars, it could be the greatest showstopper of all: solar radiation.
Charged particles from the sun are a big deal on Mars. The sun periodically emits streams of energetic particles that can actually be quite damaging.
These streams are caused by magnetic storms on the sun's surface. They hurl superheated materials from its atmosphere into space and towards the planets.
The Earth has its own powerful magnetic field, and the combination of that magnetic field plus the Earth's atmosphere, those together really help to protect us.
Both these defenses are absent on Mars, and solar radiation can be deadly. If the pioneers are to survive, they're going to have to protect themselves.
The way you would deal with that in the short term, if you had a research base on Mars or what have you, is you basically have a storm cellar. You have someplace underground where you can go until it blows over, and then you can come back up again, and that all that rock and soil above your head provides the necessary shielding.
But even if they've got effective radiation shelters, they still need to know when something's coming, how bad that's going to be, and when it's safe to go back outside.
I asked solar defense expert Richard Harrison to come up with a plan.
If you live on Mars, you've got a big problem in terms of the arrival of these events at the planet. So how would you protect yourself? How would you predict that these things are going to arrive? And one way of coping with that is to have a Sentinel spacecraft, if you like, out in front of the planet. There's a special place in space you can go to, the so-called L1 Lagrangian point. Every planet has such a point. It's basically a position in space where the gravitational pull of the planet and the sun allow a balance. You can actually orbit that point in space.
When a ball of radiation explodes from the sun, light from the event takes 12 minutes to cross space to Mars. The Sentinel should detect this light and radio a warning to the pioneers. The deadly particles travel more slowly, taking 30 minutes to cover the same distance. Now, this system should give the people on Mars 18 minutes warning to take cover.
But some of the flares that might actually hit you can occur around the corner, around the edge of the sun. So you really need another tool, another spacecraft occupying another very special position in space. So this one will actually sit out at the so-called L4 point, the Lagrangian L4 point. Now this is an angle of 60 degrees from the planet to the sun to the spacecraft. I'm looking round the edge of the sun here. I can see those flares that are occurring off that side of the sun that I couldn't see from the L1 point.
The key to staying safe from blindside flares will be reaction speed. It takes 12 minutes for light to reach the second Sentinel, and a further 12 minutes for its signal to reach Mars. By the time the warning arrives, the radiation will be just 6 minutes from impact.
On Mars, somebody will have to interpret the data very, very quickly, perhaps press a button, and everybody has personal buzzers which are basically screaming away saying, get under cover as quickly as you possibly can.
With a warning system in place, the threat from solar radiation could be managed.
As long as the pioneers stay 6 minutes from cover and they make every house radiation-proof, then they'll be safe. It sounds like a massive challenge, or so I thought.
We've got the wedge-shaped blocks for the vault. If you were really...
Bruce Mackenzie is from the Mars Foundation, and he's figured out that the solution is actually more Stone Age than Space Age.
You got to figure out what's there to build with. You know, on Mars, it's sand and clay and dust. And the obvious thing to make is bricks.
So that's what you're going to show me now?
Yeah, how the Romans could have built a house on Mars.
Bruce's plan is to build simple arches using bricks baked from local clay, just as the Romans did.
Okay, now the way a vault works, there's a force pushing down on this rock.
Yeah.
That force is transmitted onto this stone, onto that one, down to the foundation.
A single arch is vulnerable to toppling over.
What?
So multiple arches are joined to create a more rigid structure called a vault. On Mars, a series of vaults would be overlaid with an airtight sheet covered with thousands of tons of dirt to provide protection from solar radiation, and then sealed up and filled with compressed air so pioneers can live inside without pressure suits.
So this would be 16 feet across.
Yeah.
And whatever comfortable height you have. This might be a cathedral ceiling in your bedroom.
Okay. So a person would be about...
Yeah, about that tall.
Okay.
And then the person's head would be about here. And
you'd excavate down a bit.
Right.
And you might use some of that earth to go on the ceiling to keep the pressure in.
Yep.
Right. So everyone can walk around, live and breathe like normal. Do you honestly see that happening?
I'd say we could have 10 people on Mars in 20 years. And maybe a generation after that, 100 people.
Wow.
And after that, then they'll be building this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So, and what really matters is when you start having kids there. That's when when you go to Mars, you're planning to stay the rest of your life, you're planning to have kids, that's when it really takes off.
An excavation team, 10 miles out. Alarm code red. Blindside flare. And it's a big one. There's no time to get back to base. They'll have to dig for their lives. Four pioneers head for shelter with a solar flare just minutes from impact. 3 make it in time, but one man takes a dangerous hit. Radiation sickness will surely follow.
Mars is close. Mars has water. Mars has pretty much everything our pioneers could want to set up a home. But there's one other thing that makes Mars absolutely irresistible, and that's the potential to make it even more like Earth.
Mars was once a warm and wet planet. It's cold and dry today. But could it be made warm and wet again? The answer, I believe, is yes.
The concept of using technology to alter the climate of a planet is called terraforming. Mars is a prime target because all the things needed to create a warm, wet world are already there, frozen under the dirt.
Mars was quite different in the past, and it's hard for us to say exactly what it was like, but there are strong indications that in the past, distant past, I'm talking billions of years ago, it was warmer, it was wetter, it was somewhat more like Earth. It was probably still uniquely Martian. It wasn't a terrestrial paradise, but it was more like Earth than it is today.
Early Mars had a thick, warm, carbon dioxide atmosphere formed by volcanoes. But when the volcanoes died, so did the atmosphere. Without a magnetic field to protect it, the solar wind blew it away. The liquid water evaporated and the land was left cold and dry. But water still remains on Mars, along with carbon dioxide trapped in the soil. It's a frozen ecosystem just waiting to be released. All our pioneers have to do is defrost it.
We know how to warm a planet. We're doing it right here on Earth right now.
The theory is that by polluting the Martian atmosphere on purpose, you trigger the global warming processes that we're now seeing on Earth.
What you'd want to do if you want to warm up Mars is set up factories to produce artificial greenhouse gases that are much more powerful than carbon dioxide. Things like fluorocarbon gases. Within 50 years, we'd warm Mars by 10 centigrade.
That warming then unlocks huge quantities of carbon dioxide frozen in the Martian soil. This gas traps more heat, leading to yet more gas being released, and the process continues.
Within half a century or so, we can both thicken Mars's atmosphere considerably and warm the planet enough for liquid water to appear.
But would the water be of any practical use? Could we drink it? Could we use it to farm fish? The answer lies in Mars's distant past.
There were hot springs, hydrothermal system. There was water beneath the ground that would get heated and would come up to the surface, and there were probably geysers, steam vents, something like that. It was pretty nasty stuff, actually. I say water, but it was actually an acid brine. You wouldn't want to drink this stuff.
When this water evaporated, it left something behind. A thick layer of white salts. Like granules of instant coffee, these salts would turn the meltwater back to a toxic brine.
It's bad news for fish, but does it mean that nothing could live in the new water?
Astrobiologist Chris Mackay is searching for the first organism on Earth that could set up home on a terraformed Mars.
My main interest is to figure out who the first Martians might be. Well, here we have an environment that's very rich in salt. And the organisms that live here are able to tolerate these high levels of salt. And we imagine Mars warming up just a little bit. The salt solutions might become liquid first because of the antifreeze properties of salt. And so maybe the first types of organisms that could survive on Mars as it warms up a bit are the kind of organisms we find here.
You can't eat these bugs, but they're far from useless because their waste products will be like gold dust to the new colonists.
Once we can get these lowly salt bugs growing on Mars, then the production of that biology will produce oxygen or produce organic material. It'll help make Mars habitable for other types of life. So eventually, what these microorganisms will do will create a habitable world for trees and plants and animals and everything else.
Terraforming Mars may well be technically possible, but actually doing it raises a heap of ethical issues.
Different people could have different views on that. My personal view is that whether or not it's okay to transform the climate of Mars depends in large part on whether there is life there.
We have ignition and liftoff.
In August 2007, NASA's Phoenix lander launched for Mars. Armed with a vast array of scientific instruments, it spent part of its 6-month mission looking for conditions where life may once have existed on Mars and where it may still exist today. Although it didn't find direct evidence for life, it did find the likely presence of a gas strongly associated with living things: methane.
Methane is one of the great signatures of life, or at least of one particular type of life, that can make methane from hydrogen and carbon dioxide, very basic gases. And where you find methane, you sometimes find biology, not all the time, but if you find large quantities of it, you start to question the possibility of life producing that methane. So the discovery of methane on Mars is very significant because it gives us locations where we might go and look for life, even if eventually we find it's not there.
The really big deal about finding methane on Mars is that it's broken down by the sun's radiation over time. So if it's there now, it means that something is still producing it. And a possible candidate is the presence of subterranean bugs.
I think there's a lot you can do with robots, but ultimately the astrobiological exploration of Mars will be much more productive with humans. The chances of human explorers on the surface of the planet destroying that biosphere, I think, are probably very low, and I think we could explore Mars as humans without too much concern about a major impact on any deep subsurface biosphere on Mars. Send me to Mars for 6 hours with a microscope and a shovel, and I'll tell you whether there's life on Mars.
It may well be that humans could explore Mars without too much disruption to the life already there. But terraforming the planet, that's a very different issue.
If there is life there, when you consider the information that we could gain from really studying that life, then you'd really want to think twice before changing the environment in such a way that it might threaten that life, might cause it to evolve in unexpected ways, might in some way change a living ecosystem.
Mars could become covered with plant life and insects and various animals, and ultimately people would be able to live. That is the long-term vision of Mars. And while it is a long-term vision, I believe that we'll do it someday. And the reason why I have faith that humans will do that eventually on Mars is because we're life. And it is the nature of life to take barren environments and transform them into those that are favorable for the development and propagation of life. And this is what ultimately is involved in the human expansion into space. New worlds, new hope, new possibilities, an infinite future.
Planning a mission to Mars has been an unforgettable experience. I started out thinking it would be an impossible place to live.
There's loads of dust inside. Really graunchy. Having to cope with that day in and day out would be a real pain.
But I've been amazed to find that people are already building the technology to overcome the big problems.
Right now, our plans for the lunar architecture have us staying in there 14 days as a minimum, and we're going to see if we can work up to 30 days.
I've been shown that we could live a self-sufficient life on Mars.
You're talking about mud and earth making bricks.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's not aerospace. It's either civil engineering or Egyptian and Roman technology.
If something were to happen to the Earth, say in the next 50 years, then Mars is our best hope for survival. The Moon is closer, but it's much more difficult to live off the land there. Other planets may rival Mars for resources, but they're too far away to reach with current technology. And in the long run, Mars is able to offer something very special indeed: the potential to build a new Earth.